Mike Murburg is a Princeton graduate. He's a contact experiencer, a writer, instructor, and also an attorney. Mike began a CE5 meditation meetup for contactees and experiencers and others who want to learn these CE5 protocols and engage in peaceful human-initiated extraterrestrial or celestial being contact. In this interview, Mike's joining us and we're talking about synchronicity and flying saucers from the works of Carl Jung. And here's Mike. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Dean. How you doing tonight?
I'm pretty good. I've been going through some of the notes that you sent me, and I will admit, I'm not the smartest, or sharpest tool in the shed, but I think I've wrapped my head around this. And of course, you're a Princeton graduate, so probably a little bit easier for you. But we're going to talk about synchronicity, flying saucers, and I believe we're going to marry the two up, and you're going to explain to us what this project's all about.
Thank you. Yes, Dean. Let me kind of cue you in on some things. What got me started on Jung is when I was at university studying at Princeton, I was exposed to Carl Jung, and my sister's a clinical psychiatrist. She also she used to teach medicine at the University of Washington in Seattle. So we discussed Jung in quite depth when I was 16, 17, 18 through my early 20s. So I was very, very cognizant of the whole idea of archetypes and Jungian psychology. But I never knew that he was a painter, or I never recognized it. And what happened is I was on the internet and I saw one of his books on painting, on his paintings. It's The Art of C.G. Jung. And as soon as I saw the cover, I knew something was up. And here, this is one of the works.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yeah, yeah.
Those of us who are experiencers would know exactly and immediately what that is.
Okay, so we're referring to the light?
Yeah, that's an orb. There's no doubt about it. So after I saw it and bought the book, it was like, wow, this guy's a painter. He must really know something about, he must be an experiencer, a contactee. And then, I went online again and then saw that, and I had not known this. He had, this is the kind of stuff, I went to Princeton and studied Buddhism for a year, and never did I read chapter 23 of the Lotus Sutra, where the Buddha conjures up an extraterrestrial.
Right.
I mean, if me being the way I am, if somebody had exposed me to that when I was 18 or 19 years old, I never would have left the department. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, but in more recent time, last year, but maybe about 2 years ago, so I researched a little bit, and then went into Jung's later works, and then found flying saucers.
Okay.
And the title of the book is Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth, Things Seen in the Skies. And I was all psyched up. I said, wow, Jung, wow, he must believe in him. Well, after you read the book, he wrote it as a reply to a letter that he had written. And I got a copy of the original someplace on my desk here. But he had written to a flying saucer enthusiast, the head of a flying saucer group in 1953, I believe it was. And Jung's letter was paraphrased in such a way in the UFO periodical that it made him look like he was a believer in UFOs.
Right.
And society at that time, hold on a second. Society at that time was not in any way willing to accept an academic seriously if they even breached the issue of UFOs. That was an easy way to lose your tenure, to lose your respect. It's not like the more recent book by Ms. Pasoka, The American Cosmic, which I haven't gotten to read yet, but I've read excerpts of it. But I was published by, I believe it was the Oxford University Press. And back in Jung's day, that never would have happened. That's an academic press, publishing a hardcover book about UFOs and ufology.
Yeah.
So things have changed in a massive way since 1953 and 1957. And what Jung ended up doing was putting out this wonderful book, a very in-depth book, about his research into ufology and the occurrence of UFOs, but he comes up with the conclusion that, well, whether or not UFOs are real or not is irrelevant, because what they are manifestations of the psyche. And this is where it starts to get deep. Now, you get halfway through the book, and then Jung tells you, well, in order to understand this book, you really need to go back and read Synchronicity. So midway through the book, I went back and then read Synchronicity. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stick with flying saucers tonight, because that's kind of the topic. And maybe we can go into Synchronicity at another period of time. But the big news in the Synchronicity part of the equation is that unexpectedly, what Jung goes into is the Tao Te Ching. And he and a number of Taoist philosophers, Lao Tzu, who was the initiator of what's known today as Taoism, but the writer of the Tao Te Ching. And I'm finishing up my book on that. It's only taken 6 years, which is a lot of time for a book that only had 77 pages. But this is all pretty deep stuff.
Well, just Mike, just before you go on, just explain for people who don't know what the Tao is.
Okay, well, I sadly interchanged Tao and the Tao Te Ching, but the Tao, we call it God. That's a good explanation for it in Western civilization, but it goes a little further. The Tao is the universal being that created all gods. Mm-hmm. Wow. It is the oneness we experience and we live in and we live through, and it lives through us. It's the universal consciousness that unites us all. It's the entity that creates synchronicity. And just a brief foray into synchronicity, what Jung noticed was that certain things in his life were happening that could not be explained by way of chance, because they happened so frequently. So what happens is you get an X and a Y axis, and the higher the the number of synchronistic chance encounters, meetings, occurrences, the less likely it is to be chance, and the more likely it is that there's some sort of intelligence behind it. And Jung was he was a lot of things, but what he did say, when asked, famously, is asked, well, do you believe in God? And he said, no, I don't believe, I know. And there's a big difference in the two. So Jung got it, and he got God in the form that we find by reading the Tao Te Ching. And the Tao Te Ching that I like to use is Stephen Mitchell's version. It's a wonderful translation. I can't beat it. It's poetic. That's what it looks like. Yep. You can find it online. People like Eckhart Tolle notoriously say they never leave home without this book in their pocket. And those of us who know Eckhart Tolle through his works understand that this is a highly spiritual man who, can teach anybody how to meditate in 5 minutes, and can get people to recognize and integrate the Tao into their own lives to get rid of their problems. So that being the case, with just a brief introduction into synchronicity, that's all I'll do. I really didn't prepare much for the synchronicity part of it, but as far as the flying saucers part, I can go into that in some kind of depth.
Yeah, I just, sorry to interrupt again, but there was just one part of the synchronicity, one section of the book that I read, and I just kind of pulled out 3 lines that totally fascinated me. And it quotes that everything points to the mutual attraction of related objects, that if it says these happenings are as if they were the dream of a greater and more comprehensive consciousness, which is unknowable.
Yeah, and that's a universal consciousness we strive to make connection with, or to recognize connection when we go into our CE5s and do our human-initiated contact experiences. You have to tap into that. You have to recognize it. You have to, disassociate and really dissolve your ego to be able to do that. But yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. Yeah, and this is a synchronicity. It was rather funny. It just occurred to me when I was preparing to do this show tonight, is on chapter in the books that I'm using, the part of synchronicity that specifically deals with Jung and his exegesis of the Tao and the Tao Te Ching is on page 77. The part of the flying saucers, a modern myth, thing seen in the skies. The most important part of this book, in my opinion, that lays out the groundwork for where we have to go psychologically and politically in a post-disclosure world, is also on page 77.
Wow.
and I wanted to bring in something important that I had worked on 2 weeks ago. And it too was, and guess what chapter of the Tao Te Ching?
77.
77. So the fact that these three things have happened in this regard is synchronistic for those who are watching. If it had just been one by chance, but it was three. So for those of you watching, that's a pretty good explanation of what synchronicity is all about. So with that, I'm ready to answer any kind of questions you have, and if not, I can kind of explain. We've already got up to 15 minutes on this, which we're just starting to scratch the surface.
Yeah, that's fine. But in Flying Saucers, a modern myth, Jung talks about a psychic aspect to UFOs. What's all that about?
Yeah, the psychic aspect to UFOs is what he talks about is in a post-nuclear world. He's writing this in 1953 through, I believe, 57. And what he's saying is that humanity has a spiritual hunger that yields numinous projections of the unconscious. Numinous are spiritual. They're hold on a second. We have a dog in the house and it's scratching himself, and I'm hearing jingle bells. So give me a second. A little distracting. Would you close the door, please? And thanks. Yeah. So what it is a projection of humanity to be saved. At least that's what Jung says. And you have to realize that when he's talking about this, he's talking about flying saucers as nothing more than psyche, projections of the human soul and mind. For those who don't know, psyche is the thing that it's human mind, soul. It maintains the balance while seeking individuation at the same time. But it's a projection of the psyche because something is missing in our society, or something is dangerous in our society, and we all want to be saved. And that's what he equates UFOs with, is this the projections of the psyche, like magical Jesus coming to the world to save us all, because we all need to be saved, because if we don't, we risk total atomic annihilation.
So is he saying that the UFOs that we see are not physical? They're being produced by our psyche?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. And since starting on this book, I've had a conversation with somebody that knew one of Carl Jung's grandchildren, and the grandchild conveyed to this person that yes, Carl Jung was in fact an experiencer. So he not only personally knew UFOs, and you can see that in his paintings, but and I take it a step further. he had to have been afraid of being outed, because if he had been outed, there's this great body of work by a post-Freudian psychiatrist who has done more for psychiatry and for religion and for insight into the human soul than anybody ever has. And for him to go out and admit that, yeah, I believe UFOs and they're real and this is what it's all about, would have negated a body of work that stretched almost 75 years. So he had to be very, very cautious in dealing with the subject, which is why his thesis is, well, we're not going to treat these as real. We're going to treat these as manifestations of the human psyche. And by the way, it doesn't matter if they're real or not. It's still the result of the same thing. Man's yearning for a spiritual existence, because the physical existence just doesn't get us to where we need to be as human beings. We're all trying to get back to what we were supposed to be when we were made. And that's the disconnect that we have in society. And that's the disconnect that's going on right now. And I'll get into a little bit about what he says about collectivism and the kind of governments that work and don't work, and extrapolate that out a little bit. But you got it right. He's basically saying, well, I'm not going to treat these things as real at this point.
Yeah.
So,
well, he talks about UFOs being seen in larger numbers during times when humanity is in trouble, which is basically right now.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing all over the board. Is there's more and more recorded sightings. There are more and more CE5 groups getting together and actually summoning the craft in themselves. You know, we do it here every month. We have great luck in it. There's nary a month goes by where we don't make significant contact, and some of the contact has been, literally out of this world. And it all comes from a universal consciousness where you disassociate yourself from the physical world and go inside through the process of meditation, and very simple meditation too. It doesn't take much to remove yourself from the experience we have as human beings that are tied into our egos and materialism. I know it sounds very religious, but it's not. This is a form of metaphysics and a discussion of reality as it truly is.
Hmm. He also suggested that UFOs represent a modern myth. So I was trying to make sense of that, but I don't think I quite nailed it. So I might just get you to explain what he meant by that.
Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it much. But what he did, what Jung did was he dealt with myth, and out of myth you get archetypes. Joseph Campbell did the same thing with A Hero with a Thousand Faces. If you haven't read it, it's one of the most enjoyable reads you'll ever have. And if you haven't, and if those out there who haven't listened to Joseph Campbell, please do. I mean, he's absolutely out of this world. He's passed away. He was a professor, I believe, at Sarah Lawrence, and he's, Bill Moyers and he were really tight, and there was a show on with Joseph Campbell, but it's all one. It's all one and the same thing. If it's a myth, it's a manifestation of an archetype. For example, Zeus is an archetype of the alpha male. Venus is the archetype of the sensuous and beautiful Madonna, the perfect female. So this is what we're talking about with myths, and he equates UFOs, at the same level. We're not going to admit that Zeus was real. We're not going to admit that Venus was real. And in this regard, when it comes to the modern myth, he's not going to admit that UFOs are real. So that's my own interpretation, but I think it's pretty close to right.
Yeah. So I was just wondering what the mainline UFO community would, or how they would react. Would they push back on a theory like this?
Well, the theory isn't the thing. And the saving grace of this is that he admits that it doesn't matter if UFOs are real or not. This is a human need, and this is what the human need is. So the UFO community has to get out of the nuts and bolts and then read Jung for what he's really saying here. He's really saying, look, I really can't tell you about what I know and about what I really think about the reality of UFOs. I mean, he was a UFO research enthusiast himself, and that's what got him in trouble by writing this letter. essentially acknowledging acknowledging UFOs in a certain form. I've got a copy of the letter around here someplace. Oh, wait a minute. Shows you how badly I prepare. Yes, I managed to dig this one up. But would you like me to read it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Just give me a sec. The problem with UFOs is that you rightly say a very fascinating one. And what he's saying is the problem of UFOs. Not saying the existence, but the problem of UFOs is, as you rightly say, a very fascinating one. But it is as puzzling as it is fascinating, since in spite of all observations I know of, there is no certainty about their very nature. On the other side, there's an overwhelming material. Overwhelming material pointing to their legendary and mythological aspect. As a matter of fact, the psychological aspect is so impressive that one almost must regret that the UFOs seem to be real after all. I have followed up the literature as much as possible, and it looks to me as if something were seen and even confirmed by radar, but nobody knows exactly what is seen. Kind of reminds you of where we are today.
Yeah.
In consideration of the psychological aspect of the phenomenon, I've written a booklet about it, which is soon to appear. It's also in the process of being translated into English. Jung was Swiss. I don't know what he wrote in initially, but it was probably German. Unfortunately, being occupied with other tasks, I'm able to meet your proposition. Being rather old, I have to economize my energies. And I think we all know what that's all about as we get older ourselves. But that's the letter that got him in trouble. And that was the letter that was paraphrased in a national UFO publication that made people start thinking that Jung believed in UFOs, and to which he had to respond with the book the way he did, by being kind of neutral about it and saying they're psychological manifestations.
Okay. I just wanted to get back to the consciousness aspect. You know, I've listened to people like Neil Donald Walsh, for example, talk about this one consciousness and all of us being part of this one consciousness. So I kind of try to delve deeper. So I'm kind of thinking life, as we see and know it, seems to be part of a bigger picture, like we're all actors in a play and everything is predetermined.
Yeah, and that is kind of, I don't know about is it predetermined? And that gets into a whole bunch of levels of reality, and you know, is our moment in time concrete, or is it plasmic? You know, you start getting, and that's why I like the Tao Te Ching and the writings of Lao Tzu, because he breaks it down very, very well. And what he says is that we live in the world of 10,000 things, and the things that we can see and taste and touch and feel become reality to us, when in fact that there is a subtle realm that lies behind the veil. The Hindus called it Maya. And in this subtle realm, the Tao exists. And the Tao, as the highest intelligence, the great source of all things, thinks and creates and sends things through the subtle realm and through this veil of that we cannot see through, and puts it into our realities. And this is where synchronicity comes in, because what happens is, and I'm not paraphrasing him, but I'm kind of analyzing him here, is that when synchronicity occurs, that is the Tao coming through the subtle realm, past the veil, into our lives to affect it in such a way that when we recognize the synchronicity, we recognize that something special is happening and that there's some intelligence behind it. Now, the key to this, and if you extrapolate Jung's synchronicity just a step further, and I think you can easily do that, is that once you recognize that synchronicities exist, then you recognize that there's a veil that exists that separates your sense from the true being that creates and unites all things. And then once you realize that it's only the veil that keeps you from sensing that, and you get rid of the veil and you understand that there's this reality out there that's constantly present, that you just cannot see it, then you start understanding unity consciousness, the Tao, the intelligence behind what some people would call intelligent design, which I think is still a little bit confining. But that is what it's all about. And that's where you see in Synchronicity that Jung goes from a materialistic analytical standpoint right into his interpretation of the Tao Te Ching. Which is important on so many levels, because until I started analyzing the Tao Te Ching, I didn't realize the amount of political and leadership significance that comes through the Tao Te Ching in every chapter. Over half the book over half of the chapters have something to do with leadership and the kind of politics that that is going to, the non-politic that's required. And I'm going to break away here just a second and then read to you the part of the chapter in chapter 77 of the Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
What Lao Tzu says is those who try to control, who use force to protect their power, go against the direction of the Tao. They take from those who don't have enough and give to those who have far too much. What are we seeing going on today?
Yeah.
And this was written 2,500 years ago. So I speculate that Lao Tzu had his ear to the extraterrestrials, or whatever power that made him such a wise man, or a wise conglomerate of human beings. It's also discussed that there was more than one who formulated these ideas and wrote them down. But the historical fact is that there was one human being that did write this, and did write something known as the Wahoo Ching as well, and go into that in some other time.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, once you can get your head around it, it really is. And I may be just stepping off the path here a little, but the near-death experiences that I've interviewed, the common theme with all of them is that once they cross over, they suddenly feel part of a larger consciousness, and they just seem to, there's just a knowing. There's a knowing that they didn't have in during their physical life, and they just feel that they're part of a larger consciousness. I mean, probably go as far as to say, when people say there is no death, maybe there isn't.
Well, there is a physical deterioration of the body, but the hard question in science is, what is consciousness anyway? They still don't know. They can't explain it. They can't understand it. And I don't believe in death as a permanent state. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Lao Tzu teaches is that once you conquer the idea that death is real, then you can live your life fully. Because death in reality is an illusion. Mm-hmm. Control is an illusion. And this is all part of Maya. This is all part of this mysterious veil that separates us from seeing reality. And it's, the same thing happens. People describe it when they take psilocybin mushrooms, for example. Which would be a much milder form of direct or straight DMT, but it's the same thing. It breaks down the ego so that there's no difference in the ego once you're dead. And I've had one near-death experience when I was in a car crash. I fractured some ribs and my lungs collapsed, and I went unconscious and woke up in the hospital. But I do remember what happened to me, the psyche, that human soul, the mind-spirit connection. I know where I went. I saw the light, and I was told it was not my time. And I was very surprised, because I was very comfortable and warm where I was. And my life at the time was not the greatest. And then and then life drew me back from where I was. And that was a life-changing experience as well. And that's another one of the synchronicities that has happened in my own life, because you know, that and the nature of the contact that I've had for very many years since a young child, it all ties into the separation of yourself from your ego, and that's what happens in the near-death experience. What happens in a lot of the shamanistic experiences and the drug experience. It's exactly what we strive to do in CE5 when we meditate. We get out of ourselves, and then we get into the plasma sphere. You know, there's a certain sweet zone that you get into, and you get into very easily, and it's all accessible to us. And it's just remarkable that it's so easy to do, and that so many people are learning how to do it and coming on to this, because it is a consciousness changer. It is a spirit changer. It is a soul changer. And it's nothing short of that. And I think that when the world catches on to this, we won't see the kind of governments we have anymore. We won't see race. We won't see politics. We will see each other as human beings, each who are individuals with their own traits that are valuable. And we each, you know, and this is what Jung gets to, is that, you know, we were born to be the people we are supposed to be. And every time we try to be something else, we fail. And that, as a society, that causes the society to fail. And that's exactly what we're going through right now. So,
okay. So getting close to wrapping up here. So with what we've discussed here in this chat, so what should people know?
That's a good question. And what I did is got pages and pages of notes. This is going to be a great read when I get to it. But the way I can sum it up is this. I could go into Jung's syllogism, but I'll save that for the book. But the bottom line is this. It is our spiritual hunger that yields UFOs as numinous projections of the unconscious. And as a consequence, our anima, the unconscious masculine side of a woman, the unconscious feminine side of a man, transcends our personal psyche, the human soul mind. As the psyche strives to maintain balance between our opposing qualities. So what we need to do is try to maintain our balance, our psychological balance, our mind, body, spiritual balance. And this also, you know, really blends into, you know, the law of one and what Ra had taught. There's so many other things, but the message of the UFO is, the message which the UFO brings to the dreamer is a time problem that concerns all. The signs appear in the heavens so that everyone shall see them. They bid each other remember his own soul and his own wholeness, because this is the answer to the West and to the danger of mass-mindedness. And what that means is, and Jung goes into it in no uncertain terms, is that collectivism is going to be the death of mankind, because it takes individuality and the striving for individual balance, and does away with it, and it weighs the collective higher than that of the individual. And because of that, the collective is always doomed to fail, and it's never succeeded. And I think that's what we're seeing today, is a battle between the individual soul versus the collective. And that is what's causing the violence in the streets that we're seeing. And that's what's causing the conflict in our political system. And hopefully we're going to live to see a time where we'll be able to do away with both.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Hey, Mike, with the trouble going on in the world right now, and I mean, it's real trouble. It's desperate times, and you being at the forefront of the CE5 community, and I thought about it today. Do you get feedback from experiences on the type of downloads they receive from the non-human intelligences regarding humanity? humanity's plight at the moment? Is there a message from ET to humanity?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that get that. And we all have to operate on our own frequency, so to speak. My focus doing what I'm doing is every month I get 10 to 15 new people out who've never experienced contact before, and then they experience contact. And the change is phenomenal. Once you have, recognized, and there's something that happens in your heart that when you make real contact, it changes you forever. And, I don't doubt that people get this information. I had the download in a significant download October 3rd, 2015. I wrote about it in Beyond UFOs. I still have the pictures of this wonderful entity that revealed itself, and I discussed in some detail what my download was like. I've also had contact with other people where the download was physical, where it was energetic and full of light, and involved the ship right above us. I mean, this is a miraculous situation. These are miraculous events. And taking Jung the step further about UFOs not being a myth, UFOs are real, okay? What if they're real? Well, I don't believe in UFOs. I know UFOs are real. And it is my only hope that I get to expose as many people in the world out there to this as possible in the years I have left on this planet, because it's the most important thing that anybody can do with their lives. And through this sort of spiritual evolution and refinement, it's not only the only way we're going to maintain or achieve contact with intergalactic beings and societies, and not only intergalactic but interstitial and interdimensionals, but it's the only thing that's going to save the human race. Mm-hmm. Crying out loud! If we keep on seeing others in others and not ourselves in others, we're doomed. And by doing this, what I'm doing is we will not be doomed. Once we see ourselves in others and ourselves in everything else, it's like aho mitakuya osayin, is we are all of one relation. And we need to recognize that, not only with ourselves, you and me, but with the extraterrestrials and the interdimensionals that make contact with us. And then we start understanding the nature of God, the nature of Tao.
Yeah. All right. So you're now clear on your role going forward in all this?
Oh yeah, that was part of the download. So, thank you for allowing me to talk and to share my ideas. And once again, you and I meeting was more than chance. It's a synchronicity.
Yep. Mike, been a pleasure once again. Thank you, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Dean. God bless, and take care of yourself, okay?
Mike Murburg joining us today.